session. And let's be honest, your good buddy coming live to you. Well, live, you're probably watching this recorded. I'm streaming it live, however, because that's how much I care. We are talking about DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. So that's what we're doing. This is the third broadcast session that I'm doing about DBT skills. Once again, this is not meant to take the place of therapy. It is meant to supplement whatever therapy or self-help you're doing that the DBT skills can be helpful. If you want to learn more about this project, check out my website. My website's got stuff on it. That's, kind of prerequisite for a website. If you want to slash after you go to my website, you can slash groups. If you want to learn more about this or become part of this project, if you decide to slash podcast, you can also go and listen to the weekly mental health podcast that I do, The Broken Brain, and see what's going on with that as well. You can slash a lot of other things or just click on the links on the top if you want to learn more about that. As we've talked about before, we are doing distress tolerance. The distress tolerance section of DBT is a very big and important part of DBT. It's the one I like to start with. Some curriculums in DBT like to start with other sections first, but I like to start with distress tolerance, because if we can't tolerate distress, then we can't do much else. Distress, of course, being bad or distress or whatever, you know what I'm saying? It's bad stress. It's bad. You don't want it. And today we're going to be talking about a very powerful intervention where we use our 5 senses to help us with distress tolerance. You may be familiar with your 5 senses. Stop screen sharing. Okay. You may be familiar with your 5 senses. You may have all of them fully functioning, or you may not. Doesn't matter. Well, I mean, it matters for other reasons in your life, I guess, but it doesn't matter for this skill. This skill is meant to be a way to tolerate distress and reduce your emotional discomfort with tools that you always carry around with you. So your body offers you a bunch of things that can help you to distract yourself into the present moment. As we talked about before, distress often comes from worry that we have about the past or the future. And one of the things that we need to try to do when we are in a state of distress is focus on the here and now. And in a very, very literal way, the here and now being, where am I literally right this second? We're going to get deeper into that idea when we get to the mindfulness skills. But this part of the skill is a way to distract ourselves. Remember, distraction is a very effective technique for distress tolerance, because distress tolerance is not about deep, long-term problem solving. It's about surviving the moment until I can get to the next moment where I might not be in such a state of distress. So with our 5 senses, we find that we actually have some tools that we carry around with us that we can use at any time to try to distract ourselves. So that's what we're going to talk about. The 5 senses, of course, are sight, hearing, feel, taste, and smell. Sorry, we had a little bit of a lag there. Don't know why that was. Anyway, but it seems to be working out. All right, so I didn't want you guys to think that I just couldn't remember the 5th sense for all that time. Okay, so these are the 5 senses. Doctors tell us we actually have more senses than this. Actually, that's true. There is such, I mean, you can trust it when doctors say that. They know stuff about the body. Those are the 5 senses that we are most acutely aware of because we experience them all the time through sight and hearing and smell and taste and feeling stuff. We have a musculoskeletal sense is one of the things that doctors tell us. For example, I know where my hand is right now, even though my eyes are closed. That's actually one of your senses. I only mention that because it's an interesting fact that gets into a little bit of like meditative thought and mindful thought that we'll be covering in another skill session. That your body is actually doing a lot of things for you that you never have to think about. Breathing, for example, telling you where your hand is when your eyes are closed, or me being able to pick up something without looking down because I can find it, and things like that. We don't ever think about that, but that is something that your body does. Now, your brain, the clever little device that it is, filters out a lot of feedback that you are getting. One of the ways that I'll test this out in my office when I'm talking to someone about this is when you are talking to me, you're listening to my voice, you're hearing your own voice, and we're exchanging things. Once in a while, you might be conscious of another sound. Maybe there's something happening right outside the window. A car drives by, it's very loud, it's dramatic, and we notice it. So here's the deal. One way to test and see what your senses might be filtering out would be to sit and listen for a moment. We're not going to do it right now, but if we were, you'd probably hear a clock ticking or music playing outside of where you are, or people talking in the hallway. If you're in my office, once in a while you hear these murmured voices going by. So our brain actually filters a lot of that out, because if we were to pay attention to all of the sounds and sights and feelings that we have all the time, it would probably drive us crazy because we have too much input. In fact, there are certain sensory-based disorders that give people all that input and they don't have the ability to filter, and it's very difficult. So our brain does that job for us because it's supposed to. However, all of that information lies just below the surface of your conscious awareness. For example, if I said, what does your left foot feel like right now? You'd say, oh, well, I immediately know what it feels like. But you probably were not focused on that before I asked about your left foot or whatever part of you want to feel. That's your business. So because we have our brain actively filtering these things out, we don't get distracted from the things that we're focused on, which in this case would be our stress. But we can manipulate that. Just like I said before about hearing, stop and think of all the things you can hear. Let's pick on some of these and see how we might use them. Sight. Sight is one. And as I said before, you may or may not. Some people have some of these, all of these senses working, and some do not. My grandfather, who just passed away, was blind for the last several years of his life, so he did not have use of his sight. If that's the case, just focus on another one, of course. But we're going to focus on this one right now. So if you were to use your sight to help you to just tolerate your distress in a better way, one of the things you might do is you might look ahead of you and say, what can I see right now? And literally, let me list in my head all the things I can see. If I was to do that right now, because I'm actually looking into a screen that shows me what's behind me. So I would see the computer screen. Within that screen, I see myself. I see the picture hanging on my wall. I see my chair that I sit in. I see my whiteboard. I see my bookshelf and all the things that are on that. And I could go through and kind of list all the things that are on that in my mind. What I'm doing is I'm using just a little bit of conscious attention to help to potentially distract myself from whatever stress I might be feeling or whatever it is I want to distract myself from. Variations off of this, when I'm using sight, can include looking at all of the textures or colors and saying, not only do I see that chair, but I see all the little decorations. I see some green, some leaf shapes. I see some red. I guess that's a little flower shape. I see these little black thingies, the squiggly lines and things like that. I can see that and look into the texture, the pattern, the colors, the shapes, whatever it is. And the interesting thing about this is that it does not require a ton of attention to do that. I could do that. Many of us could do that while we were sitting in a meeting, particularly if we didn't have to pay very close attention, or a classroom, or church, or wherever we are. Unless we are having to give extreme attention, then we could usually do something like this. I'll tell you, I've even been in a situation where I was presenting and I was filled with a type of stress, or maybe I was worried about something outside of the meeting that I was in, and I was actually the one giving a lesson or a presentation. And I actually would use visual cues as well, just kind of like pan around and see, do I see a lot of colors? Or those kinds of things. What kinds of things do I see that are red or blue or whatever? And it takes such a little amount of attention that it just distracts that part of my mind that's already drifting, and may, in fact, already be an improvement over how distracted that I was. So that would be one way. These all kind of go through the same thing, but let me tell you a couple things I think are interesting about each one. If you're using hearing, I already talked about this idea of listening, really listening to everything that's around me. This is something that actually can work on two levels. One is a very practical level where we say, what can I literally hear? Can I hear noises outside? Can I hear birds? If I'm taking a walk, do I hear things? Do I hear the grass or the leaves crunching under my feet? If the grass is crunching, you probably should be wearing a coat because that's ice, buddy. Be careful. If the leaves are crunching, it's probably fall. Probably still a coat? Anyway, we'll leave the subject of feet crunching on stuff. If it's warm and your feet are crunching on stuff, I don't know what that is. Just look down and verify that there's not just a bunch of dead crickets. But listening to the noises is one way. That's a very practical surface level to use hearing to tolerate your distress. The other way is to actually listen for the content and the quality. This is one that many times we neglect when we are talking to someone, is that we are thinking about, what do I say next? Or we're thinking about, how do I respond to what they're saying, or what kinds of things are important to me emotionally about what's going on. Or we might be thinking about, what do I have to do after this conversation ends? How do I get out of this conversation? I'm socially uncomfortable. These are all the locations of thoughts that I'm giving here. Not very neurological, but that's where they are. I don't make the rules. Anyway, actually paying attention to the content of what the person is saying, listening to their inflections, listening to how they might be presenting emotion in what they're saying. It's one of the things that can actually communicate respect and love to other people, and can in the long run also help us socially. And so we're tolerating distress and also jumping into interpersonal relations at the same time. It's a twofer, kind of a little DBT cheat there for you. But it can, if you put that effort and that energy in, then it can help you to distract yourself away from whatever you're distressed about. Feeling is one of my favorites. Sounds a little pervy when I say it that way, but that's not what I mean. Is it what I mean? I'm not sure. There's feeling with your hands. Like that, what I just did. I just felt my hands rubbing against each other. And that's something we think of. Sometimes, this is also a sound thing, by the way, if I was to focus on hearing the sounds that are in this. Other thing is, think about this. You got keys in your pocket. Keys are one of the great distress tolerance coping skill tools that exist that we very take advantage of. When we stick our hand in our pocket, keys just kind of absent-mindedly, like this. What am I doing right now? Well, I'm feeling my keys. And if you think about it, really feel all the textures and ridges on a key. Keys have different head shapes. That's actually how locksmiths know which kind of key to use in a pinch. Some of them have those novelty heads that just throw that off for everyone. But they're on a ring, by the way, that's got all these little grooves and little bumps and stuff. What I'm doing right now is I'm actually focusing a certain amount of my attention on these keys. And you'll notice I'm still able to talk and function. Maybe even better than if I was distracted about that bill I have to pay, or that thing I have to do, or that person to call, or whatever else is going on in my mind. Sometimes with the five senses distractions, people say, well, it'll distract me from what I'm doing. Well, if you're in a state of distress, you're already distracted from what you're doing. This is actually a way to ground you in the moment, which might make you participate better. And keys are just one example of something. The other thing is to get beyond your hands. People, they're gone. Well, they're off screen. And pay attention to what else you can feel. Right now, if I try, I could focus on and feel the feeling of the shoes around my feet. I can feel the shirt that I'm wearing. I can feel this little pin that I stuck in here that sometimes distracts me while I'm trying to talk to people. And sometimes I have to pull it out in the middle of the session, throw it across the room in a rage. Another thing that helps when you're talking about trying to be grounded in the present with your five senses is taking notice of what I call anchor points. Where do you interact with gravity? Your feet, your posterior, whatever. Right now, that would be both for me because I'm sitting in a chair and my feet are on the ground. And feeling the feeling of that and experiencing it. Interestingly enough, with feeling, it can often distract you from your distress unless, and this is an exception you might want to be aware of, if you tend to get stressed out about pains in your body, or you have any trace of compulsive hypochondria where you're worried about physical symptoms. I have had people who try this as a distraction technique, and it actually heightens their distress because I can feel myself. Am I feeling my heart beating? Am I having a heart attack? That's not helpful, and you have to know yourself. Just like we've talked about before in DBT, none of these is more powerful than knowing yourself and knowing what works for you. So if you look down here, I want to show you a taste. That's the word taste, in case anyone forgot what it looked like. So taste, here's the thing. It doesn't have anything to do with having good taste. You already saw my shirt. Oh, anyway. It's not that bad of a shirt. Come on, guys, don't pick on me in my mind. Taste is actually a useful thing that we don't always think about when it comes to distress tolerance. Think of taking a piece of gum. For example, one of these little slices of gum that I have in here. You get that reference of slices of gum, text or tweet or email it to me. If you were to take out a piece of gum and you were to put it in your mouth, I won't do it now because it'd be very rude and it would play havoc with the sound. But you could feel the texture of the gum bending and folding and turning into a mushy little pile of disgusting. Anyway, that kind of ruined that piece of gum. There's my hands again. You could focus on the taste experience that you're having. There's a physical feeling, obviously, it kind of crosses a feeling, but there's also a taste component and an experiential component. Tastes are very extreme. Some people like spiciness and other things. I actually had a client years ago, now that I come to think of it, who used Warhead candy as a way to reduce heroin cravings. This is a person who was getting off of heroin and some other drugs. And if you're familiar with Warhead candies, the sponsor of today's episode, apparently, you put them in your mouth and then you want to die for just a second or two because they're so sour. They make a spicy version too. But I remember this individual would use the sour, pop them in his mouth, and it would go for just a few seconds. And that was enough to buy him the time to change his focus onto something else and not crave heroin. So, I mean, that's a pretty silly little thing, it sounds like, but it was useful for someone who already wanted to stop using heroin. He even discovered, I don't know if any of you know this, but they sell, or at least they used to sell, little Warhead flavors that you could just pour the liquid flavor in your mouth for true candy masochists out there. So in that way, it was a very pointed, purposeful use of taste to distract from a very specific type of distress. I'll share this one with you. This one may or may not be, I like this one too. Smell is useful because, you know, these, remember, once again, these are about distractions. They don't always have to be pleasant. Not all smells that we notice are pleasant. If you take the time to smell what you can smell, maybe it'll be pleasant, maybe it won't. I won't get into unpleasant smells, but I'll tell you one little trick that I have used that I pass on to people is that if I am outside, almost all parks, office complexes, buildings, hospitals, even many people's own homes, properties, apartment complexes have these like evergreen bushes or evergreen trees hanging around. And if you walk by one of those items and you happen to snag a pine needle or a little bit of the evergreen, I don't know, material, pull that off, break it, and smell it. Like I just showed you how to smell something apparently. It has that burst of evergreen smell, which is actually, for many of us, has lots of memories associated with it. Maybe if it makes you think of Christmas trees, or maybe it just clears your mind for a second. I do this all the time, even when I'm not in distress, because it reminds me that I'm outside. And that can be kind of a cool thing. I had a client years ago who would carry a little baggie that had cinnamon sticks in it. I've also known several people who use essential oils and little cotton pads in their own home, or even carried around in a purse or a little baggie in their car. And this becomes like a little kit. So this ties in with the last little thing that I'll mention, which is if you use your 5 senses to distract you from distress, one of the useful things that you can do is you can actually build yourself a little kit of things that you can look at, that you can listen to, that you can feel or taste or smell, that can actually help and can be your emergency kit that you can use in a pinch when you need to distract yourself. I'm going to finish this skills workshop with this little meditation bell. If you listen to that noise that it makes, you'll notice, probably, depending on the quality of this recording, it tends to echo as it fades away. So one of the things you can do is you can listen to something like this purposefully as a way to distract yourself to the present. So go out there and use your 5 senses to distract yourself away from your distress and into your present moment. Next week, I'll be back at you again, talking a little bit more about distress tolerance and giving you some more tools that you can use in your DBT arsenal for your mental health. As always, if you want to learn more about this project or if you'd like to contribute, there is a way to donate to help keep these groups going and keep them free. Once again, it's going to dwighthurst.com, and if you go /groups, it'll tell you all about that if you are so inclined. If you do that, you do get membership to an email list where you can get back and forth advice from other participants who are viewing these skills groups and get some feedback there, and there's some other bonus materials. Also, if you go to the website, you will find other just different materials and writings that might be helpful to those of you that are trying to increase your mental health and well-being. Anyway, until next week, thanks again, and have a DBT wonderful, I don't know, week, whatever.